Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today's story is about this Union officer, James Birdseye McPherson. For those of you students of the Civil War, you're probably very familiar with the story of his death during the Battle of Atlanta, July 22nd, 1864. The story of him riding up suddenly on enemy soldiers. He attempts to flee, and as he is about to turn around, he raises his hat slightly and then takes off. When the Confederate soldiers open fire, one soldier actually is ordered to fire, according to the story, and brings down McPherson, ending a highly respected Union officer. In fact, his West Point days, he was well remembered on both sides, and he was widely mourned by generals on both sides, the Union and Confederate. And so the story, and you may not be quite so familiar with this, the original story, the story that I just told you, is from a Confederate soldier, a Captain Richard Beard. And that story shows up in literature in 1875 in response to Sherman's memoirs. And Captain Beard writes a letter that's published in the newspaper. And it tells basically his side of the story because he's the officer who ordered a young Corporal Coleman to fire the shot that brought down McPherson. So I want to read you the story, and then I want to read you another story about the Union side of what happened. So let me start with the story of Captain Beard. And this appears in a Nashville newspaper, the Union American, June 27th, 1875. And so it says, McPherson's fate, a graphic account of his death before Atlanta. And here we go. The publication of Sherman's memoirs has elicited much and varied comment and brought out many important facts bearing upon the war between the sections, but none that will be read with more general interest than the following, written by Captain Richard Beard of Murfreesboro, a gallant ex-Confederate who was not simply an eyewitness, but an active participant in the affair which he so graphically describes. Now, here's Captain Beard's letter to the Union and American. That's the Nashville newspaper. He says, I notice in your paper and also in the banner, that's the Nashville banner, of the 24th, that's June 24th, 1875, a letter from a correspondent at Shelbyville connecting my name and also that of my company with the killing of Major General McPherson of the United States Army in the Battle of the 22nd of July, 1864, before Atlanta. Both letters are substantially correct, with the exception of one important particular. The impression is made by your correspondent that we were detached at the time and in ambuscade, which is erroneous, for we were in line of battle with our regiment, the 5th Confederate, and with Claiborne's, that's General Pat Claiborne, his division, to which we belonged. After my return from prison, he was later captured. At the close of the war, I heard that it had been charged by the Northern press that General McPherson had been murdered, and I have been frequently requested to write a letter of vindication and to give an exact statement of the facts connected with his death. But owing to my ignorance of localities and the general arrangements of the Battle of the 22nd of July, I have failed to do so up to this time. The simple, unvarnished facts of the case, however, are these. For a day or two previous to the battle, I had been in command of a brigade line of skirmishers, and early on the morning of that day was ordered to join my regiment and division, which were moving out from Atlanta on the Decatur Road in order to strike the left flank of General Sherman's army under the command of General McPherson, which stretched across the Augusta Railroad. While halting upon the road, we were furnished with 60 additional rounds of ammunition and were told that there was a hard day's work before us. We were placed in line of battle about 12 or 1 o'clock in the day, and the last order given by General Pat Claiborne to us was to move forward, turn neither to the right hand nor to the left until we were within the enemy's breastworks. Shortly afterwards, a heavy and rapid cannonading commenced from what we supposed to be General Bates' division, which announced too clearly that the ball was about to open in good earnest. Under the excitement aroused by it, we commenced a double quick through the forest covered with dense underbrush. Here we ran through a line of skirmishers and took them in without the firing of a gun, and suddenly came up to the edge of a little wagon road running parallel with our line of march, and down which General McPherson came thundering at the head of his staff, and, according to my best recollection, his bodyguard. He had evidently just left the last conference that he had ever had with General Sherman near the Howard House, and was on his way to see what the rapid and sudden firing upon his left all meant. General Sherman is certainly mistaken in his memoirs when he says that he was almost, if not entirely alone, for I estimated his rank entirely by the size of his retinue, and in that estimate I fixed his rank at nothing less than a corps commander. He had a considerable staff with him, and according to my best recollection, a bodyguard followed him. He was certainly surprised to find himself suddenly face to face with a rebel line. My own company, and possibly others of the regiment, had reached the verge of the road when he discovered for the first time that he was within a few feet of where we stood. I threw up my sword to him as a signal to surrender. Not a word was spoken. He checked his horse slightly, raised his hat as politely as if he was saluting a lady, wheeled his horse's head directly to the right, and dashed off to the rear in a full gallop. Young Corporal Coleman, who was standing near me, was ordered to fire upon him. He did so, and it was his ball that brought General McPherson down. He was shot passing under the thick branches of a tree, and as he was bending over his horse's neck, either to avoid coming in contact with the limbs or, more probably, to escape the death-dealing bullet of the enemy that he knew was sure to follow him, he was shot in the back, and as Sherman says in his memoirs, the ball ranged upwards across the body and passed near the heart. A number of shots were also fired into his retreating staff. I ran immediately up to where the dead general lay, just as he had fallen upon his knees and face. There was not a quiver of his body to be seen, not a sign of life perceptible. The fatal bullet had done its work well. He had been killed instantly. Even as he lay there, dressed in his major general's uniform, with his face in the dust, he was as magnificent a looking picture of manhood as I ever saw. Right by his side lay a man who, if at all hurt, was but slightly wounded, but whose horse had been shot from under him. From his appearance, I took him to be the adjutant or inspector general of the staff. Pointing to the dead man, I asked him, "Who is this lying here?" He answered, with tears in his eyes, "Sir, it is General McPherson. You have killed the best man in our army." This was the first intimation that we had as to who the officer was, as to his rank. Beard goes on a little bit more. He says, General Sherman alleges in his book that General McPherson's pocketbook and papers were found in the haversack of a prisoner afterwards. That may be so, but that prisoner did not belong to our party. Put a pin in that note by Captain Beard that McPherson's pocketbook and papers were found on another soldier, because this has some direct bearing to the Union version of the story that I'm going to read to you in a little bit. Anyway, Beard continues, that may be so, but that prisoner did not belong to our party. Captain W.A. Brown of Mississippi picked up this hat that had caught in the branches of the tree under which he had fallen, and that was the only piece of McPherson's property disturbed by any of us. As I stood over the body, the bullets were beginning to whistle rapidly around that locality. Soon after, an order was sent commanding the division to move by the right flank. Major Richard Pearson A gallant officer who commanded the regiment was on the extreme left and in front of it and did not hear the order, but pushed on to the Federal entrenchments, which were before and in sight of us. I was satisfied that then, detached as we were, the movement would only result in our death or capture, but feeling it my duty to stick to the colors of my regiment and share its fate, no matter what it might be, I did so, and the result was, as I anticipated, we were all taken prisoners. So that's Beard's account. Now, I want to take you just a few days afterwards to July 1st, 1875. This is an article in the Indiana State Sentinel, and it adds a little bit more detail. And then I'm going to read you another account, a Union account. This particular account is a recognition that Captain Beard's account has appeared in the Nashville newspaper, and it adds a little bit more. So let me read this to you. An ex-Confederate writes to the Nashville Banner, that's the other newspaper, some particulars of the death of the gallant officer named above. That's the headline referencing McPherson. The general public, as well as General Sherman, knew nothing of the circumstances under which General McPherson met his death in that hard-fought battle before Atlanta of July 22nd. It has been reported that he was murdered by the Confederates. The facts are as follows. He had gone in front of the line of battle expecting the protection of his skirmishers, but they had been captured, and while passing along a crooked road through a dense forest, he was suddenly and unexpectedly in close proximity to the Confederates. So near was it that Captain Richard Beard, whose company was at this road, presented his already drawn sword, and the general, melancholy as it were, took off his hat. He turned his horse immediately, without a word having been spoken, and was making to the rear rapidly when a corporal in Captain Beard's company fired, and the gallant McPherson fell to the ground on his face and knees, shot through the heart. This command moved immediately to the front and was very soon captured, leaving the body untouched. But in this instance, as was customary, men in the rear rifled the pockets and took the boots off his feet. For further and more minute particulars, I refer to Captain Beard, now in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a son of that distinguished theologian, the Reverend Richard Beard of Lebanon, who, gallant in war or time of peace, will cheerfully give any further information of which may be possessed. So this unnamed writer in the Indiana newspaper basically repeated Beard's letter, summarizing it and adding the notes that after Beard and his company left, others came and rifled the general's body, taking his boots. So now we have the general's boots being taken. We also have the other accounts by Beard referencing Sherman that the pocketbook of McPherson was found in the knapsack of a Confederate prisoner. So all of that is a lead-in to this Union account, which to my knowledge has only been published in a newspaper or in newspapers in July of 1864, soon after the battle happened. In fact, this account comes from the Chicago Tribune, and it's dated July 29th, 1864, 1 week after the battle. And so this account has, it's because it's early, it's 11 years before Richard Beard writes his letter for publication. So the Confederate side is not known at this point, only the Union side. And so here's the account in the Chicago Tribune. The late General McPherson is the headline. And then the subhead is particulars of his death. And it goes on from there. And this story, by the way, is copied from the Nashville Times. So here we go. Through the kindness of Major Young, engineer on Colonel Lowe's staff, who learns the particulars from General McPherson's staff officers, we are enabled to furnish the following particulars. General McPherson's department held the left of the line in the fighting before Atlanta. The corps were arranged in echelon. The general had written from left to right, ridden from left to right in superintending the advance of his skirmishers line, and was returning again to the right when a party of rebel bushwhackers in ambush ran from their covert between the 16th and 17th Corps and, crying out, "There they come, give them hell," fired. A couple of staff officers and 2 orderlies accompanied the general, all of whom escaped except the general, who fell and expired almost instantly, the bullet having cut the aorta. The enemy rushed forward to rifle the body. Officers and orderlies meeting Colonel Strong, Inspector General, and Captain Buell, both of General McPherson's staff, accompanied by a few orderlies, related the circumstances. Colonel Strong instantly drew the party into line and ordered a charge. This handful of brave and impetuous men, regardless of the foemen in front, dashed gallantly ahead and drove off the thieving enemy, and while Captain Buell, with his revolver, kept them at bay, Colonel Strong, assisted by the orderlies, lifted the nude body, stripped of every article of clothing save a glove and a sock, to his own horse and bore it safely from the field. Beneath the light glove covering the left hand was a diamond ring, which the vandals failed to discover and which will be forwarded to the general's friends in Ohio. This is one of the most gallant little episodes of the war, and Colonel Strong's daring and determined charge for the body of his loved chief is worthy of the pen of the history's poets. So there you have it. 3 versions, 2 really, the Confederate version and then 2 versions of the Union account of General McPherson's death. And so we have versions here all recognizing that some other Confederate parties were involved in stripping the body, but the stripping of that body ranges from Captain Beard's account that something may have been taken or he wasn't responsible, it wasn't his men. And then you have the Indiana account mentioning that his boots were taken. And then you have this July 29th, 1864 account coming copied from a Nashville newspaper saying that McPherson's body was completely stripped of its clothing, and except for a glove and a sock, and that glove having a diamond ring on it. So that's the account. I'll add one more note. In my research of a Civil War nurse named Mary Bickerdike, who was closely associated with the Army before Atlanta and, in fact, with General Sherman, she says that she washed the blood-stained shirt of General McPherson, packaged it up, and sent it to his family. So there's yet another account noting that his shirt was on McPherson when he was brought back. So just to give you an idea of how reporting of the time in newspapers and then letters of recollections of individuals who were eyewitness and direct participants in the count, there's a little bit of variation between all of them. So there you have it. Take care. Appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode.